The sun rises over the cobblestone streets of a medieval town, spilling golden light across timbered houses and a bustling marketplace. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys as merchants arrange their stalls, blacksmiths send sparks flying with every hammer strike, and children dart between the legs of busy townsfolk. Life pulses here, alive with the rhythm of survival. But hidden among the familiar sights is someone whose importance is easy to overlook. Without him, the town could fall apart. Without him, the people might go hungry. This is the story of the miller, the master of grain, the silent heartbeat of medieval society, and the quiet architect of daily life. To understand why medieval towns could never survive without millers, we need to step back into the Middle Ages, a world where survival was a delicate balance with nature, politics, and community. Towns were growing, markets were thriving, and populations were rising, but food scarcity was always looming. Most people relied on cereal crops: wheat, rye, barley, and oats. These grains weren't just food, they were the lifeblood of the town, the foundation of nutrition, even a measure of wealth. Bread, porridge, and gruel filled every stomach, but raw grain alone couldn't sustain anyone. It had to be turned into flour, and that was the miller's craft. Picture a typical medieval town for a moment. Narrow lanes twist past rows of wooden and stone houses. Bells ring out from the marketplace, calling people to trade or simply to listen. Amid the bustle, a steady, grinding sound hums from one building, the mill. Inside, the miller works tirelessly, turning massive millstones, watching every grain, making sure nothing is wasted. It may seem like a simple job, even mechanical, but the miller's work is essential. Without him, the bread would be coarse, inconsistent, or even dangerous to eat. The miller held a unique place in society. He was respected, yes, but also a little feared. He controlled the process that turned raw, humble grain into life, sustaining flour. Every town, big or small, depended on him. Lords needed him because taxes were often paid in grain, and that grain had to be milled before it could be used or sold. Peasants needed him because their families couldn't survive on raw grain alone. A town without a miller could face famine, and a greedy one could spark rebellion. The balance of power was delicate, and the miller stood right in the middle of it. But the job was far from easy. Grinding grain took skill, strength, and ingenuity. Early mills were powered by hand or animals, like donkeys and horses turning treadmills. Later, watermills harnessed the energy of rivers, and windmills caught the invisible force of the wind. Each type demanded knowledge, of mechanics, of nature, of timing. A misaligned millstone or a poorly maintained wheel could ruin the harvest. The miller's craft was part science, part art, and entirely indispensable. The miller also played a social role. He was often the bridge between the lord and the peasants, collecting a portion of the harvest as payment, sometimes bartering for other goods. He needed to be shrewd, fair, and occasionally cunning. Millers knew the rhythm of the town better than most. They could tell when the harvest would fail, when tensions might rise, even when whispers of rebellion were spreading. In many towns, the miller wasn't just necessary. He was a gatekeeper, holding the key to survival. The importance of the mill was reflected in laws and customs. Lords often required peasants to use the lord's mill instead of grinding their own grain. In France, this was called banalités. In England, staple rights. The lord got his share, and the miller enforced it. But the miller's influence went beyond money. He shaped diets, affected social gatherings, and determined how communities came together. Because bread was at the center of every meal, the connection between technology and society was fascinating. Watermills needed to be carefully placed along rivers, often requiring legal agreements about water use. Windmills demanded knowledge of the weather and terrain to work efficiently. Millers had to maintain their machines, adjust grinding speed, and protect their mills from floods, droughts, or strong winds. Every day, towns relied on their expertise to transform raw grain into reliable food. The miller's role touched every level of life. For peasants, the mill was the bridge from harvest to table. For bakers, it supplied the core ingredient of their craft. For merchants, it generated tradable goods. For lords, it was power and wealth. Essentially, the miller connected every thread of the town's survival, from soil to oven, from harvest to plate. Despite their importance, millers were often misunderstood. Stories and songs painted them as greedy or dishonest, skimming flour or overcharging customers. Yet these tales overlooked the reality. Running a mill was expensive and labor-intensive. Mistakes could destroy livelihoods. The miller had to balance necessity, ethics, and survival. Because failure didn't just affect him, it affected the whole town. Mills themselves were symbols of progress. Watermills and windmills were marvels of engineering, showing medieval society's ingenuity. Building a mill took collaboration. Carpenters, masons, blacksmiths, and laborers all contributed. These structures weren't just functional. They represented collective effort, technological advancement, and the harmony of human ingenuity with nature. Every turn of the millstone was a testament to centuries of knowledge and skill. The miller's influence extended into culture and ritual. Bread was central to religious ceremonies, feasts, and daily life. Festivals celebrated the harvest and the act of grinding grain, honoring the labor behind the sustenance. Millers were part of this rhythm, connecting practical work to spiritual life. They were custodians not just of food, but of continuity, tradition, and community cohesion. When famine struck, a missing or broken mill could spell disaster. Historical records tell of towns left vulnerable when their mills burned, flooded, or were destroyed in war. In those moments, the miller's skill, or failure, could decide who survived. Food distribution relied on precision. Bad flour could make people sick. The town's lifeblood flowed through the mill, and the miller was its unseen, crucial force. Think, too, of the economic ripple effect. Flour could be stored, traded, or baked into bread that fed locals, travelers, soldiers, and merchants. The miller's work fueled markets, stabilized economies, and connected communities. Towns with skilled millers thrived, towns without them struggled. The miller was, in many ways, the heartbeat of the medieval town. Even the layout of towns reflected the miller's importance. Mills were built strategically, on rivers, near marketplaces, or at the town's edge, both accessible and protected. Some were fortified, others became landmarks. The spinning wheel symbolized progress, sustenance, and stability, a promise that life would continue. The legacy of medieval millers reaches into today. We take flour, bread, and food supply for granted. But centuries ago, the miller was the guardian of survival, the bridge between harvest and nutrition, the quiet force holding society together. Without him, kitchens would falter, markets would stall, and communities could collapse under hunger. As the sun sets, the mill continues to turn, a steady rhythm echoing life itself. The miller, skilled and tireless, ensures the harvest becomes bread, that survival remains possible. He is more than a tradesman, he is a steward of life, a master of craft, and a pillar of society. Every loaf, every feast, every meal owes its existence to his hands. So, the next time you hold a slice of bread, or watch flour sift through your fingers, remember the invisible legacy of the medieval miller. Their work wasn't just about grinding grain. It was about sustaining civilizations, connecting communities, and shaping history. Every medieval town depended on them. And in the grand story of survival, progress, and society, the miller remains a quiet hero, turning the wheels of life, one grind at a time.